Welcome everyone. For those that are joining us in this webinar, we are going to wait for a couple of minutes while we wait that other get into our virtual room. We have a very interesting, intellectually stimulating conversation for this afternoon, so we don't want to waste any second of this conversation. So please just stay connected, get comfortable in your seat, maybe take some pen and paper because I'm sure you will may have some questions and comments with what you are going to hear today. Thank you, Jenny. Jenny Duprez and Amy Darrett and my colleague Anele Ngadi have been my co-inspirator for today's event for this webinar. And I'm seeing that our virtual attendees are arriving as well. It's very special today's event because we are having people connected from different parts of the globe. Indeed, at this moment, we have colleagues that are joining us from Chile, from England, from Bangladesh, from the east side of the United States, and of course from South Africa, from Eastern Cape. And Jenny's just sharing with us that the seminar will also be shared through YouTube channel. So just give us a couple of minutes to start, and I'm gonna, in the meantime, say that what we are gonna hear today is a presentation about the academic life of academics living in Bangladesh, and we will have a conversation about how is the academic life in the Global South. So your inputs, your own experience will be highly appreciated, how we are building knowledge from our experiential, from our experiences. I'm seeing more people are connecting at the moment. So before we start with our formal introductions. Not complete. I just noticed that my internet connectivity failed. Not sure if all of you got to hear my introduction, Andre. I see yours.
We can hear you well. Did you open the event, Roxana? I didn't hear you.
I was literally saying a kind of 2 minutes of saying hello everyone, welcome to this virtual gathering, to our webinar. It's such an honor to be with all of you here, and I was giving you the floor to you, Andre, to kicking off this webinar. Yeah. We are being challenged by the technology. Please go ahead.
No problems, no problems. In fact, there's nothing wrong with repeating it, Roxana. Okay, so that's great. So good morning, afternoon, evening, friends and friends. It's great to have so many of you joining us for what promises to be a great and lovely discussion. My name is Andre Kiert. I am the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Engagement and Transformation at Nelson Mandela University and an organizing member of the ACUSAfrica Network. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to the first seminar to be held under the ACUSAfrica banner. We have different sets of series happening in our space and across the networks that we are members of. And for this particular network, this is the first one. Navigating Shomoyscapes and faculty life in the Global South. In particular, Welcome to Riyad Shah Jahan, Emma Tasnim, and Nijargo Niloy, who are presenting today, and to Carolina, Guzman, Valenzuela, and Fadia Dhaka, who will be responding to their presentation. The Advancing Critical University Studies, the ACUSAfrica Network, was born out of a need to move beyond the standard templates of higher education studies, as well as to address the limitations of critical university studies itself. Therefore, the network aims to bring together scholars and practitioners with an interest in radical approaches to the study of the university in order to reimagine how to study the sector, its institutions and culture, with a long-term goal of reimagining the university itself. Riyad, Emma, and Nijargo's work on navigating Shomoyscapes also attempt to find new ways of conceptualizing life in the university, particularly the experience of temporality, by proposing the idea of Shomoyscapes as opposed to timescapes. The interest in finding concepts that fit context, particularly in the global south, as a way to avoid the continued colonization of knowledge, resonates strongly with the spirit of ACUSAfrica. And we thoroughly look forward to their presentation and what we are sure will be a rich and productive discussion. I will now give the floor to Roxana to introduce our speakers. Welcome again.
Thank you so much. I hope my internet connectivity works and allows me to give the warmest welcome to all of you. I am extremely honored to be with these 5 colleagues that I admire. I'm going to start introducing my colleague, Karina Guzman, Valenzuela. First, Carolina is a professor at the University of Tarapacá, Chile, in the north part of Chile, in the limit with Peru. She has written extensively about academic life in Chile and is currently leading a project on the geopolitical flow of knowledge in the field of social science, trying to demonstrate those power dynamics that are happening in our region in Latin America. Now, I am very pleased to introduce Fadia Dhaka. Fadia is a senior researcher fellow at the School of Education and Social Work at Birmingham University and deputy director of CSpace, the Center for the Study of Practice and Culture in Education. Fadia's research is concerned with the critique of the contemporary Western university. Her work explores the interplay between and the tension surrounding time, space, social acceleration, and affect within academia. Welcome, Fadia. Welcome, Carolina. Carolina and Fadia will be responding to the presentation of Riyad, Emma, and Niloy. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce the speaker for this afternoon. I'm going to start with Riyad. Riyad is a professor in the School of Education at the State University. Now I cannot say Riyad. At the
Michigan State University.
I won't mix it up. He has written extensively about the role of transnational actors and processes, international organization, global rankings, and media, and education policy, rethinking the traditional object of studies and practice in higher education, always from a very critical eye. Thanks, Riyad, for bringing those lenses of temporality, decolonization, and critical race studies to our field. Emma Tasnid is an outstanding undergraduate student at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. Thank you for being with us, Emma. And her interests primarily include migration, globalization, medical anthropology, and political ecology. Now it's my turn to introduce Niloy Nichargo. Niloy completed his postgraduate studies at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. Niloy's interests include political communication in the public sphere, modernity in South Asia, partisan tendencies in South Asian politics, neocolonialism, rhetoric, and semiotics. Thank you so much for taking the time to share what you have discovered, for bringing us that seed that will inspire our discussion today. The floor is all yours, Riyad, Emma, and Niloy.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm going to quickly share my screen and then we'll get started. First of all, welcome everybody. Good morning to those who are in North America. Good afternoon to those who are in South Africa, as well as those who are in the UK, and a big good evening to those who are in South Asia. I have some colleagues here from Bangladesh and some participants who are in our study here, so I'm so excited that you've come to join us. Quick thank yous to so many people who we stand on the shoulders of for this presentation. I want to thank our dear colleague here, Dr. Roxana Chiapas, who has been in correspondence with me in putting this together, to Dr. Jenny Dupreez. I apologize if I'm spelling the name incorrectly. To our colleagues in critical university studies in Africa, this is a great pleasure. I've seen a lot of your work and so nice to finally connect virtually. I also want to give a big thanks to my colleagues in the UK, particularly Dr. Fadia Dhaka, as well as my colleague in Chile, Dr. Karina Guzman, for taking the time to read and respond to our work today. It's a great honor. So really, to get started, this study is really about trying to make sense of temporality. And by temporality, what I mean is how we experience, relate, and make sense of time. So it goes beyond the notion of clock time. And as someone myself, and of course there's Fadia here as well, and Carolina, who've done work around temporal studies in higher education, many who discuss temporality in higher education usually focus on faculty working in the global north, particularly North American as well as Western European university context. And in that literature, often the topic of acceleration, speed, digitalization, as well as the ways in which affect are interconnected with this notion of time has been elaborated and discussed. But we want to kind of complicate that narrative a bit today by bringing some global South perspectives. So to get right into the heart of our study, this is a quick narrative from one of our colleagues in Bangladesh. This is Shabuj, who did his PhD in the global north. And in this narrative, he compares experiences in life in what he lived in the global north versus now his life in Bangladesh. And basically what he's talking about is that he used to plan before, but he realized that plans don't work in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Why? Because of the traffic, which is a major theme, and we're going to discuss about that a little bit later. But basically he's saying that he's given up planning. He's learned to basically embrace the uncertainty because uncertainty is the norm. So basically what he's doing here is he's raising the questions of temporal inefficiencies in traffic and meetings. And for him, time management, this idea of a time management is a misnomer. And it's a misnomer because he's used to this notion of predictable time when he was living in the West, but he uses that notion of predictable time to then map time or understand time in Bangladesh. And so this is very interesting for us. And this is the kind of narratives we don't often hear in the global North literature I tend to work with. So this just gives you a quick glimpse of what this study is about. I'm going to now give the floor to my colleague Niloy, who's going to give you a brief overview of Bangladesh and the Bangladeshi higher education context. Niloy, go ahead.
Hi everyone, thank you. Let me demonstrate a brief overview of Bangladesh now. Bangladesh is a South Asian country bordered by India, Myanmar, and the Bay of Bengal. Bangladesh is currently the world's 8th most populous country, where South Africa is the 24th most populous country. But South Africa is 8 times bigger than Bangladesh in terms of space. Bangladesh's GDP per capita is about $1,700 where South Africa's GDP per capita is more than $6,000 According to World Bank, it has one of the fastest growing economies. Bangladesh has one of the fastest growing economies in South Asia. As a result, people in Bangladesh are experiencing rapid urbanization, overcrowding, numerous kinds of environmental pollution, and unequal distribution of wealth. Along with the emergence of modernity and capitalism, Bangladesh has also experienced temporal transition. For instance, agriculture-based Bengali calendar has been gradually replaced by the Gregorian calendar. People once expressed time with the Bengali notion of Bela. Nowadays, expression of time has become more industrial. People mostly depend on modern clock time. There are two major political parties in Bangladesh who also entrenched their temporal changes to establish the historical narratives of those parties. For example, the party which comes to power introduces their own events and holidays to the calendar, and people have to follow them. Now let's get into the overview of Bangladeshi higher education sector. Let's go to the next slide. So overlapping timescapes in higher education sector is connected to the British colonialism, which started in 1757 in Bangla. The public universities in Bangladesh were first established by the British Raj. The first university was established in 1921. On the other hand, the private universities were introduced in 1990s. They mostly follow the American models. Temporal differences can be observed in the public and private sectors in the context of state politics, accountability, hiring, and research funding. We focused on the universities situated in the greater region of Dhaka for three reasons. Firstly, this is the capital and the largest city in Bangladesh in terms of area and population. Secondly, Dhaka is the hub of higher education in Bangladesh. 55 private and 11 public higher education institutions are located in Dhaka, including numerous affiliated institutions of 2 public universities who also offer higher degrees. Thirdly, Dhaka is experiencing rapid economic and infrastructural growth, so we could connect with a diverse pool of respondents based on gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, and region. Next, Emma will demonstrate the idea of Shomoyscape that we used in this paper. Let's get back to Emma. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Niloy. So in this paper, we introduced to you the notion of Shomoyscape. This notion is built on Barbara Adams' idea of timescape. Like timescape, Shomoyscape also denotes the assemblage of temporal features. It also denotes the inseparability of time and space and context. And it talks about how time is experienced differently due to social difference. The next slide, please, Dr. S. So, but during this project, we noticed that timescape is not enough when we talk about temporality in Bangladesh. That is when we coined a more culturally sustaining idea, which is Shomoyscape. Firstly, like the global north, yes, in a lot of cases in Bangladesh, we have a self-sufficient autonomous self. But way more powerful than this autonomous self is the collective nature of Bengali culture. It partly stems from the ever-present precarity in almost all aspects here. And in response to this precarious situation, people depend on family or extended family networks for social support. This collective nature is seen in many aspects of life, including temporality. That is why time in Bangladesh is almost always relational. The social hierarchy here is also very explicit. This hierarchy can be in terms of class, gender, age, etc. This decides whose time is more valuable, and due to it, elders and workplace seniors are often privileged. For example, an academic event or seminar can't often be started because a workplace senior has not yet arrived yet, even though she or he might not even be a part of that event. Secondly, time in Bangladesh is often non-linear and recursive. Commodification and scheduling of time are often resisted, as we've already shown you in the first slide of our presentation. But at the same time, due to global capital, time here is sometimes linear as well. And finally, this relates to what Niloy said about Bangladeshi higher education, the Bangladeshi context. The modern and traditional notion of temporality is intertwined and enmeshed together. For example, we celebrate both the Gregorian New Year and also Pohela Boishakh, which is the Bangla New Year. So Shomoyscape incorporates all these notions and enables us to get a better understanding of temporality in Bangladesh. In the following discussion, we will explain to you gradually what are the Shomoyscapes of our respondents and how they navigated. Now I'll give Dr. S the floor to tell you a bit more about our methodology. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So now I'm just going to give a quick context of the data of our study. So we did semi-structured interviews with 22 Bangladeshi academics, and we also visited campuses, and we observed them across 4 different universities located in Dhaka. And Niloy has already explained why we focused on Dhaka. And this included 2 public research universities and 2 private universities. There was a balance of gender in terms of 9 females and 12 males. We had senior academics, junior. But what I want to bring your attention to is the fact that we interviewed people, and people who were part of our study came from different disciplines, all the way from hard sciences to biomedical to social, to humanities and fine arts. Now, we don't elaborate on that here in this particular presentation, but disciplines really do shape the kind of faculty life, or your timescapes of or Shomoyscapes of faculty life. These interviews were about 60 to 80 minutes. They took place in Bengali or English, and it covered many aspects of life, like roles and tasks, trajectory, career and work-life balance, their perceptions, and as well as their dilemmas with time and the role of affect. I'm not going to go too much into data analysis because I want instead to have time more. And interesting, we always are running with time, which is part of, again, the Shomoyscape. We argue that the Bangladeshi faculty are negotiating their Shomoyscapes by subjectively responding to the external precarity or temporal constraints that are evoked by larger spatial, structural, or cultural temporal forces. And hopefully for those of you who are around the world can relate to some of the things that we're talking about. And here, particularly in this presentation, we're going to illuminate how Shomoyscape manifests in 3 areas, which were the larger temporal forces in our faculty lives. One was traffic, party-based university politics, and the third, the future of others. And Emma is going to talk about the first theme, traffic.
Okay, so thank you again, Dr. S. So traffic in Bangladesh is referred to as traffic jam because traffic deters mobility, which causes spatio-temporal discontinuity. To break that down, traffic halts one's movement across space and also time. But what's interesting is that in Bangladesh, the existence of traffic is non-negotiable. And as people can't negotiate traffic, they negotiate various other temporal categories to move around traffic. For example, if we think of traffic as a pin on a board, that pin stays fixed while other things in the board are moved around to fit around it, thus causing a displacement of temporal categories. This displacement occurs in 3 ways. First, in our respondents' attempt to avoid traffic. I'll just explain the first theme very briefly as we have limited time. The next 2 themes I'll discuss in detail. Now, going back to the discussion, avoiding traffic time. For instance, one respondent of ours, he wakes up at 4 a.m., works out a little, takes his breakfast, and leaves for his work by 6. If he lives any later than that, he will face a great deal of traffic and will not be able to get a place for parking his car. However, he reaches work and he doesn't actually work for 5 hours after reaching work. Instead, he finishes his, the rest of his morning rituals like taking tea, a proper breakfast, or reading the newspaper. Here we see how various temporal categories like body time, me time, family time are displaced in order to avoid traffic. Press the next slide, please. So in the next slide, we talk about instrumentalizing traffic time. This is another theme we found. Dr. S, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. Okay, so in this slide, we talk about instrumentalizing traffic time, which is another theme we found. Our respondent, Isha, she lives pretty far away from her workplace, which makes her spend a lot of time on the road. She has a car and a chauffeur to drive her to places, unlike a previous respondent who drove himself. She tells us that she makes the best use of traffic jam, as you can see in the quote. Now, how does she do that? She tells us she does all the calls, all family calls and networking calls, all the calls she has to do during traffic. She also does class prep during traffic, even though she prefers to do it at night at home. Here, her Shomoyscape consists of class prep time, networking time, family time, and traffic time. And as traffic stole away time from other categories, she made up for it by reallocating other temporal categories like class preparation, networking, or calling relatives. There are other things to note here as well. Isha can't leave home early because to avoid traffic like our other respondents. And the reasons for her not being able to leave home early is that her father-in-law lives with her and her husband. And she insists on having breakfast and dinner at home, mainly to spend time with her father-in-law. Now, this is a good example of Shomoyscape is relational, as we told you in the earlier part of our presentation. Our Shomoyscape is also an excellent example of the coexistence of local time or relational time and linear time. And we see that this coexistence has occurred because of communication technology, as she uses her mobile phone to communicate. The next slide, please, Dr. S. So in the next slide, we talk about another theme, transforming commute time into collective social time. This was another way traffic displaced temporal categories. In this slide, we talked about Nila. And before I go into Nila, I want to say that this theme, commuting time to transforming to collective social time, this happens for respondents who usually use the university transportation. And Nila is such a respondent. She lives very far away from campus. It takes her 2 to 4 hours to go home and come back from work, to go home and go to work. She tells us that this steals time away from her social time. And interestingly, in response, as she can't have the social time she used to have because she spent a lot of time in traffic, you can see that I bolded this out in the quote. She has formed a social group with her colleagues who also use the same bus. They listen to music together, they go out to dine together, and so forth. They celebrate each other's achievements. And this just didn't stop at the social group formation. Their time together also opened up doors for research collaboration. I also bolded it out in the quote, you can see. I think the note here is that Nila doesn't enjoy the same temporal autonomy in deciding when she leaves for work as the first respondent do, because her schedule is restricted by the bus schedule. So Nila's Shomoyscape consisted of fixed bus schedule, social time, networking time, traffic time, where their social time and networking time were displaced and then merged together with traffic. Now, next, Nila will tell you about university politics. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Emma nicely demonstrated how traffic works as a great temporal force in our Bangladeshi life. So before I start about university politics, I want to remind ourselves again that the university politics we are talking about is not a mere departmental or internal politics. University politics dominant in the Bangladeshi public universities is mainly national political party-based politics. This phenomenon stems from a structural spatio-temporal reality because the public universities had a major role in political upsurges in the history of Bangladesh, such as the 1952 language movement, the 1971 Liberation War, and so on. Basically, university politics is a dominant temporal force in the respondents' Shomoyscapes as it demands time from our respondents. By demanding time, we mean that university politics compels our respondents to attend to politics while draining time from non-political temporal categories, such as teaching, research, family time, me time, and so on. Consequently, respondents face precarity regarding their career trajectory. Sometimes the respondents face frequent momentary precarity regarding the temporal categories in their Shomoyscapes. Moreover, the intervention of university politics restricts the faculty having their necessary timeless time needed for research and or teaching. While exploring these happenings, I will also gradually explain how politics demands time from respondents' life. Let's look into Shobuj's narrative first. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, Shobuj is a professor in a public university. His Shomoyscape consisted of teaching, research, students' well-being, family life, and political activism. According to Shobuj, university politics stifled university administration from functioning smoothly as there were no set guidelines for evaluating academic activities like teaching, research, etc. Consequently, according to him, faculty supporting the ruling party-based political factions were preoccupied with their promotion and access to resources through politicking. So they get a promotional advantage in their career because of ruling party alignment. Shobuj, however, resisted ruling party-based university politics and instead engaged in anti-establishment activities. Rejecting the time demanded by the ruling party university politics puts Shobuj at a promotional disadvantage. Simultaneously, engaging in anti-establishment activism also demanded time. Either way, university politics drained time from Shobuj's Shomoyscape. Although he is passionate of his research and teaching, he is not certain what would happen to his career, promotion, and so on. He faces precarity regarding his career trajectory. However, claiming that ruling party affiliated faculty can always avoid such precarity would be untrue. So let's go to the next slide, please. The next example is of Zareen, an associate professor and chair of a social science department in a public university. Her Shomoyscape consists of her administrative duties, teaching, childcare, and scholarship. This happened right on the day we took her interview. You can see in the presentation. In this quote, we can see that she negotiated her childcare duties to greet her VC at a celebration event. She calls it professionalism. But considering the argument by Schultz demonstrated here, this is more of a political activity than a professional one. So her childcare duty is momentarily interrupted and became uncertain, while university politics demanded time from her Shomoyscape. Unlike Shobuj, who faced long-term career-related precarity, Zareen faced frequent but temporary precarity in her Shomoyscape. The former part of our interview with Zareen was interrupted constantly as Zareen worked rampantly with her colleagues to change the title of a proposed speaker series to align the title with the celebration of the 100th birthday of the father of the nation. We heard her concerns about how the university leadership expected each of the units to align the activities with such a celebration event. Zareen was also drafting some exam questions while talking to us. According to Zareen, teaching was her main occupation. She prioritized teaching activities the most, like taking classes, exams, or grading. The interview session and the question drafting came to a standstill for that moment when Zareen was talking to the other teachers, other faculties for the celebration event. During the interview, whenever the proposed speaker series came up, Zareen prioritized that over everything. Thus, non-political temporal categories like childcare and teaching in Zareen's Shomoyscape faced momentary precarity. Lastly, for some respondents, university politics siphons off their timeless time. Jamal, a professor of science, had to navigate such a Shomoyscape. He heavily prioritized his research, and timeless time was an important feature in his Shomoyscape. However, as Jamal noted, and I stated earlier, public university administration cannot function properly because of politics. He shared issues of nepotism and his discontent towards the university administration imposing duties on him. As a professor of public research university, Jamal believed that he should focus more on research. Thus, according to Jamal, unnecessary duties informed by the politically influenced university administration restricted his timeless time. So we can simply say that Shobuj, Jamal, and Zareen's experiences encapsulate how university politics invokes different precarious situations by demanding time from faculty's lives. There is one thing I want to add here again. We mostly explored the faculty life in terms of university politics, but recently the student protest against the tuition fee hike in South Africa has caught our attention. In Bangladesh, many public university students, along with the faculty, are actively engaged in politics, including the nationwide movements. This was not very common in the private universities. However, private university students have engaged themselves in some recent movements, such as 2018 road safety protests and the tuition fee related protests during the COVID pandemic. What spatio-temporal transition is related to such events, or how these activities and or events affect the private university faculties, could be interesting topics for further research. Now, Dr. Riyad will demonstrate the idea of feature of others and how Shomoyscape is manifested through the feature of others as a temporal force. Let's get back to Dr. Riyad. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emma and Niloy, for sharing the other findings. So far we've discussed how our respondents navigated precarity, or particularly temporality, within precarious physical space, i.e., the roads, traffic, as well as the structural context, particularly in the context of public universities, the notion of party-based politics. But also, Shomoyscapes is shaped by a collective culture. So once Shomoyscape was always entangled, and particularly here, we're going to talk about the future of others that were also entangled with one's past. And so by future of others, we're referring to futurity and well-being of one's parents, children, and or family. And this was a dominant concern among our faculty as they shared their career aspirations, trajectories, and even their daily temporal rhythms. So for instance, some of them talked about how they shifted from one particular institution to another because of the temporal constraints they faced in the previous university. In other words, there wasn't as much flexibility. So they moved to another university because they were looking for temporal autonomy, flexibility of time, in order to, for instance, take care of their child with special needs. Another example is of someone who moved from a prestigious international NGO job and joined the academia simply because they had a mother who needed long-term care. And so they were looking for flexibility, hence they entered the academic life, okay? But basically, it also impacted their daily temporality. In other words, issues around family property, childcare, elderly, which is something I'm going to elaborate in a second. So this first example is from Mahmoud. Mahmoud is the only son in his family. He studied in the West and came back abruptly because he was very concerned about his father's health. Mahmoud is an example, narrative is a great example of the collective notions of Shomoyscape, whereby he has to react. When we were interviewing Mahmoud, he was talking about how he was preoccupied at work with a battle over land property that was inherited by his mother. He shared in terms of how, given that she was upset, it impacted him and his work. And so there's this notion of affect and how affect plays a role in terms of how we navigate work, particularly when we're dealing with a collective culture and Shomoyscape here. And so what he's talking about here, and I'm not going to go too much in the quote, is that he was very much preoccupied in trying to take care of this inherited land that was being taken over by the government, right? And so he talked about how he had to, so his Shomoyscape was basically encompassed with the future ownership of this land, the present, his mother's well-being, as well as past in terms of the inheritance of this family property. And it was further entangled with the temporal rhythms of government offices, police, local politicians, because he talked about how he had to constantly be in touch with these different offices in order to do something about the land. So this is just one example of the notion of precarity in society, particularly with land and so forth, that may be given for some of us, which was not. And so that's something that really preoccupied his time. Another one is question of childcare. So childcare and family care is very much gendered in Bangladesh. So many of them, as the studies show in terms of female academics, they face significant barriers with their career trajectories, as well as issues around work-life balance. And here is an example of Neela, who we introduced earlier. She's collaborated with colleagues in Scandinavia, and so she was comparing her experiences with her colleagues in Sweden with her life in Bangladesh. And so she notes here that the lack of social infrastructure in schooling, broader society, and broader security was a hindrance or a temporal constraint for her. She talks about here how for her son, she was preoccupied with her son in terms of extracurricular activities, which she assumed that in Sweden would be taken care of in the normal school setting, but here she had to take care of private tuition, things like that. And so her weekends were taken away, being preoccupied by taking care of her child. But secondly, what's important is that security. So in Bangladesh, especially in Dhaka, you can't just let your child go around anywhere. Usually parents or some elder is with them because of issues around safety and things like that. Again, so this notion of Neela's Shomoyscape being an assemblage of schooling infrastructure, broader social security, and children well-being is demonstrated to show how Shomoyscape is about relational time. So just to quickly conclude, what we found from our study is there are no autonomous or discrete temporal boundaries among our respondents, but their temporal categories were always implicated in each other and entangled. And the three temporal forces that we discussed, whether it's traffic, party-based university politics, or a future of others either displays, demanded, or entangles one timescape. And also what our study highlights is the larger precarity within a global South urban context. And as Niloy pointed out, the rapid urbanization, the precarity that is introduced because of rapid economic growth creates multifaceted complex temporal constraints and introduces complex Shomoyscapes in our faculty lives. And this is really important. Temporal autonomy is not necessarily individualistic, but for our participants, it's collective. And they're responding to the others is not a simple question of will, but simply a responsibility. And finally, for the Bangladeshi case study, it highlights that precarity seems to be salient, not necessarily only in the conditions in the halls of, within the halls of the universities, but rather the larger precarity in society that has larger repercussions on faculty lives. I'm so pleased that we have colleagues from around the world, and maybe some of the questions or issues we raised is something we need to ponder upon, is how does Shomoyscape look similar or vary in other rapidly developing economies like Central Asia, Central America, Vietnam? Furthermore, how can we revisit the scholarship of academic temporality from global South perspectives, and what new questions can we ask? And with that, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Emma, Niloy, Riyad, for this presentation. I'm gonna give the floor now our colleague Carolina Guzman, Valenzuela from Chile. Carolina, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Roxana, and thank you very much for having me here as a commentator of this fascinating paper about time. We had previous conversations with Riyad about this topic, and this topic has been underexplored in the university, and is a fascinating topic, and we can address it from different perspectives. So what I'm going to do now is commenting on this paper, and at the same time, I'm going to compare it with some of the conclusions and discussions we reached in Chile when we conducted a study about time in a public university in Chile, which is a part of the Global South as well. I'm going to start with a quotation by Barbara Adam. She was mentioned by Emma. She's a British sociologist, and she's specialized in social theory, and particularly in time as a social phenomenon. She stated that theories by themselves are not sufficient for understanding time as a key concept. Instead, there is an additional need to ground knowledge of the social relations of time in particular practices and technologies. And I think that precisely what our colleagues have been presenting here is that time is a relational issue and is context specific. In modern life, time has become a commodity, and human beings navigate through multiple timescapes. An instant world presents itself mediated by technologies that promote quick and fast interactions. The fact that we are having right now this webinar is a proof of that. Although time can be seen simply as linear divisible clock time, what is called objective time, time as a social process is deeply rooted in cultures, values, social relationships, wealth or lack of it, gender, ethnicity, organizational cultures, and so on. From here, diverse and multiple narratives of experiences on time emerge. People's multiple experiences of time are simultaneous, are context-specific and socially grounded. The subjectivity of time matters. This is what the Shomoyscapes paper wisely shows us. In examining the subjectivity of time, it is also important to take into consideration factors enabling or restraining certain experiences or subjectivities about time. These are kind of structural variables shaping our experiences of time. In their paper, our colleagues narrate stories by academics in universities located in Dhaka, where life and cultural complexities shape their time frames. In the narratives, we see, for example, how politics, family demands, values, and responsibilities, as well as daily matters such as traffic issues in an overpopulated city, make us think about academic time in a different way. In this paper about academics in Bangladesh, time experiences seem far away from ways of organizing and experiencing time in Western neoliberal universities. In neoliberal universities, doing more with fewer resources and at a quick pace is key. As this is so this is so in academic life. In the study I mentioned we conducted in Chile some years ago, we saw this neoliberal context shaping the experiences of time. Chile is a paradigmatic case, unfortunately, of a neoliberal higher education system. And to be honest, when we started our study, we never planned to explore the issue of time. It wasn't our aim. What happened was that during the interviews, academics started talking about time again and again, and we said, wow, there is a big issue here, and it wasn't among our aims, but it's important to address it. So the study was focused on academic responsibilities and tasks, and the ways in which academics had to adapt to their academic life. The academics we interview experienced the pressures of clock time that materialize in academic workloads with tasks compressed into timeframes. The workloads here were characterized by a diversity of roles and tasks that had to be undertaken without there being obvious connection among them. So one important experience about time we detected was the fragmentation of time, or the experience of fragmentation. Chilean academics also experienced time with different activities having diverse paces and speeds. For example, responding to requests of different natures, and each with its own time horizons, having to deliver research reports by fixed deadlines, having to respond to students' emails 24 hours. I mean, students write in the most incredible moments on a Sunday, for example, at 3 a.m., having to participate in several meetings in one day, having to meet administrative demands and complete performance, and having to plan quite different activities with their contrasting timeframes, both in teaching and research. More tasks were accomplished within limited time spaces, and a sense of being continually on the edge of time. Chilean academics found it challenging to complete tasks within the time horizons associated with those tasks, but they also experienced difficulties in establishing boundaries between their academic works and their wider life world. Especially women struggle with this issue because of their domestic tasks. This phenomenon was shaped by digital technologies that facilitated a pattern of working anywhere mobile. And this is particularly present right now in the pandemic time, where working from home has overlapped with private life and living at home. In comparing the analysis offered by our colleagues in Bangladesh and my own study about time in Chile, I think that national policies and cultural structures are key. Actually, I think that one of the core ideas in the paper presented by our colleagues is the following. While indeed the modernity notion of individuality, rights, and agency is prevalent in Bangladesh, there are equally powerful notions of collective subjectivity underlying one's desires, aspirations, memories, and/or agency that refract across social differences of gender, class, ability, and ethnicity. Amid such precarity, familial networks and community are vital sources of social support. As our colleagues stated, temporality is always relational. By contrast, in our Chilean study, a managerial and marketized idea of university seemed to be colonizing our time in academia. In the marketized and managerial Chilean university, time was a precious asset, with academics having simultaneously to engage in numerous tasks and take on multiple identities attached to research, teaching, outreach, and management. Being productive in the marketized and neoliberal university that competes for financial resources has become a major driver for Chilean universities and their academics. In this context, time is literally money. There being direct relationships between output and income. The more academics produce, the more income they receive. This productivity, including papers published and grants awarded, is measured by quality agencies, a process that has become key in the allocation of resources nationally. Although all the participants of our study in Chile conceived teaching and research very demanding and time-consuming tasks, all of them enjoyed both tasks. However, a different feeling emerged regarding administrative tasks. Bureaucratic tasks caused some demotivation among academics, although some of them seemed to adapt to the system and accept it with resignation. Bureaucratic time was not worthwhile, according to them. I'm finishing, just one more minute. Universities in a marketized context exert their power and control and attempt to frame academics being into particular patterns. And so I want to finish with just one idea, and the idea of critical agency and cultural studies. And I think that this study presented by our colleagues is key in this sense. In thinking about how cultural, financial, and political factors shape in academia and the experience of time, the paper presented here makes me reflect on the processes of agency. While in Western cultures, one may tend to analyze individual agencies in relation to managing time, in this paper, collective agency and the way in which families occupy an important place in organizing and prioritizing academic tasks seem crucial. Much of this time management, though, is shaped by precarities at different levels and dimensions that have an impact on universities and their academics. I sense that our colleagues in Dhaka did not have very much control of their time due to these precarities. Same thing happened in Chile, with academics not having a real control of this time, their time. However, and in spite of these limitations and restraints, academics in both countries manage to find ways to have some degree of control and agency in relation to time. This resonates with the idea of critical agency that contests basic and predominant academic structures. This critical agency is, in turn, a cultural-based agency that is firmly rooted in values, ways of being, and imaginaries about life in a specific context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you for those reflections. And now I want to give the floor to our colleague, Faria Dhaka. I know, Faria, this is a topic that is very close to your heart and your research. We are looking forward to hear your impressions.
Yes, it is, absolutely. And, thank you again for the opportunity to be here and respond to this very, very important paper. and it's important precisely because it begins to address that major gap in the literature within critical university studies when it comes to temporality and the subjective response to how different people, differently situated people, experience time and feel time. What I will do is offer a few comments and in terms of a theoretical response or a conceptual response to begin with, and then a broader reflection on the time we live in and what the implications of this time are for the study of time and temporality and rhythms, not just in universities, but beyond, which is in a way what this paper talks about. So in starting, the paper opens with an overview that gives us a sense of the major and rapid socioeconomic transformation of Bangladesh, Dhaka in particular as a mega city, where we see the coexistence of local temporal structure characterized by cyclical, recursive, and traditional sense of time, and modern linear clock time that is accompanied by, but enabled by, a profound technological transformation, which in turn bring about different speeds of transformation and differently felt speed of transformation in what it's defined as a landscape of temporal hybridity. And that justified, rightfully, the main claim of this paper, which is the need to capture conceptually a number of contradictory tensions and the plurality of this different experience of time. So you, as in you authors, propose in this respect Shomoyscape as what you define a culturally sustaining concept and an apt signifier and heuristic device to explore the participants' complex temporal landscape by relying on an idea of time that crucially goes beyond Western industrial nation of clock time to encompass memories, present moments, feelings, duration, or different forms of temporal engagement, quoting your own paper. Again, to recall the main characteristic of the Shomoyscape and the way in which it differentiates itself from Adam's timescape, you mention it as a collective, as a relational, and as embodying precarious non-linear time, indeed resisting notions of modern time, identifying then three major temporal forces to be reckoned with in the respondents' Shomoyscapes, which are traffic, university politics, and future of others, quite interestingly. And these major forces, non-negotiable forces to be reckoned with, allow you to gain insight into the daily life rhythms of your faculty in the urban Bangladeshi context of the megacity. I would like to highlight in this respect two areas of work and, let's say, scholarly contributions that I think bear a significant affinity with your rendition of Shomoyscape and that immediately came to my mind as potential avenues for further theoretical refinement or simply as an opportunity to enrich the discussion. One is Sarah Sharma's notion of calibration and power chronography that she expresses and explains in his book, In the Meantime, Temporality and Cultural Politics. As the critic Ben Laughlin points out, Sharma sheds a powerful light on the, and I quote, infrastructure of labor made up of varied intersecting and interdependent temporalities, of waiting and rushing, of serving and cajoling, of supporting and distressing. Sharma's ethnographic study of, in her case, frequent flyers, taxi drivers, slow food lifestylists, and yoga instructors resonates in a distinct way, albeit different, with your rich description of the Bangladeshi faculty juggling multiple temporal categories and having to negotiate with major temporal forces by a constant act of recalibration. Traffic constraints and the familiar ties are very strong cases in point. Secondly, Sharma, and crucially, Sharma argues that differential relationships to time organize and perpetuate inequalities. So claims about a blanket speeding up or need to slow down miss how power works through the synchronizing of some people's patience and others' haste. A key finding, and I continue the quote, is that everyone, regardless of status or situation, worries about calibrating to other people's and organizations' schedule, an impossible and individualized desire for a feeling of control, which struck me as characterizing the work of calibration that goes on in much of the global north type of faculty, and goes hand in hand with a permanent sense of frustration, shame, and guilt for not being able to calibrate and recalibrate sufficiently well. While your analysis, and indeed the very idea of the Shomoyscape, departs from Western obsession about linearity of clock time, social acceleration, and the individual desire to exert control over one's schedule, it nonetheless, it seems to me, implicitly acknowledges Sharma's claim that differential relationships to time mirror power differential. It's hinted at, for instance, in some of the example that you mentioned. For instance, Bangladeshi faculty with car and drivers are allowed a different type of negotiation with the traffic force, and an unusual time to be appropriated to do some tasks that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Whereas other participants who are, not in a position, for instance, to have a personal chauffeur or driver, to own a car and have to rely on public transport, they have to flexibly find alternative ways to make up for the loss or waste of time during the transport time. In this respect, I think your idea of the Shomoyscape could be nicely complemented by Sharma's power chronography that she develops from, developing from Doreen Massey's theory of power geometry. And in other words, my question is, what would a power chronography of your respondents' Shomoyscapes reveal? Again, you hint at that in your vignettes, but could be made more explicit in a sense. The second scholarly contribution inevitably comes back to my own area of research, which is rhythm-inspired analysis that come from Lefebvre's theorization of rhythm, and my own analysis of what I call rhythm thinking in higher education as a political and ethical signifier of the good life together, which I express in a chapter that was recently published called Rhythm and the Possible, in a textbook edited by Philip Bostel, Inquiring into Academic Timescapes. So once again, we talk about rhythm in higher education settings, where I talk about rhythms and a plurality and contradictory nature of the way temporality is expressed and negotiated in the academy. And I connect the notion of plural and contradictory rhythm with the sense that we ought to politically and ethically work towards forming alliances, what I call rhythmic alliances and refusals, who help us and will help us find acceptable rhythm for the good life together. And I will return on the notion of collective well-being in a second. What I want to draw attention here on the fact that Shomoyscapes are, by definition, by your definition, rhythmic constellation. I believe in your paper you say that, and I quote, they signify the inseparability of time and space, that help us illuminate the, at times, centrifugal tensions of Bangladeshi faculty reckoning with hybrid temporal structure. Here, a more explicit rhythmic approach focused on the arrhythmias that you highlight, and the anticipatory presence, which is rooted in a non-linear, or what I call the vertical time of imagination, and forms at different forms of appropriation of unusual time spaces. You gave once more the example of what can be done in traffic if we displace our activities and move them. could be beneficial to your analysis, allowing us to discover a bit more about the faculty's spatio-temporal experiences in their political, cultural, and societal intersections and entanglements, especially in terms of their agency and futurity or future orientation within a temporal landscape that, as you said, is characterized by precarity and non-linearity. To be more specific, once again, more specific, from a theoretical standpoint, the definition of Shomoyscape as non-linear time, as potentially referring to those memories, the present moments and feelings, chimes with the Lefebvrean theory of moments, which underpins his theorization of rhythm as a constellation of significant moment. And here, you know, Lefebvre talks about time as not being about evolution, so not being about the linear Western progression, but about involution. And he talks about the manifesting of disrupting and the disruptive emergence of critical moments. So the fulfillment of a moment is never an absolute present, for each moment is inscribed in its preceding form while simultaneously anticipating future returns and renewals. And it seems to me that this confirms the intrinsic relational and differential nature of both rhythms and the complexity of the Shomoyscapes as you define them, as constellation of human and non-human, particular and universal type of encounters. This, I think, in my view, resonated with your description of the faculty, of the Bangladeshi faculty daily rhythms, and most notably, as I said, with their attempts to appropriate unusual time spaces for work during the lengthy commute. You offered, indeed, to go on, a fascinating account of 1 minute. Can I have 1 minute? 1 minute. A fascinating account of university politics as demanding time and interfering with the career trajectory of your faculty. And I ask you, in this case, what are the possibilities of subversion that this arrhythmic configuration might offer? In this sense, Shomoyscapes in their complexity and rhythms signify not only a relationship with time, with the experience of time, but of possibility, of ethics and politics, thus acquiring existential saliency. And I want to conclude with a broader reflection that closes the circle by going back to the opening of your quotes. Your paper opened with a contrast. I believe is one of your respondents who talks about control, contrasts, control, certainty, and time management in the North against the uncontrollability, uncertainty, and time inefficiency of global South. Well, it struck me as the global pandemic has effectively dissolved those discrete boundaries that are non-existing in your account, reinscribing uncertainty and inefficiency in the temporal landscape of the global North and generating, by using the term inefficiency, a deep psychological discomfort that is generated by the loss of control. We have been experiencing the dissolution of campuses, of work and home boundaries, the return to or exposure of heavily gendered division of labor in the household, what becomes the burden of childcare when this adds to the extended work shift enabled by instant technology. We have seen a necessary temporal renegotiation of those boundaries around family needs that bring us closer to the scenario depicted in the Bangladeshi faculty. Family needs that were previously delegated to institutions in the North or to other welfare providers. Interestingly, it seems to me closing the gap with the familiar traditional narrative dominant in your faculty's accounts and story. In a sense, and I conclude, we are witnessing a strange convergence here between North and South, prompted by exogenous dramatic circumstances. I wonder if this is at once signaling the urgency and offering the opportunity in Lefebvrean terms, the historical moment to be seized and invented, to rethink, rebalance, recalibrate our relationship with ourselves, with time, through time, with our loved ones, with the profession, with the institutions and the environment. What if, in other words, time inefficiency and uncontrollability were instrumental to a collective rather than an individualistic move towards a more sustainable and, as Harmut Rosa would put it, a more resonant way of being? And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faria, and thank you all the colleagues. I'm going to give the floor to the presenter for some minutes to respond, and I want to invite all of our attendees around different times. How can I say the time-space relations to raise your questions, your comment. I have some thoughts thinking of the conditions that shape my relationship with time as a early career academic in South Africa, but before taking the floor, I would rather prefer to give the floor to you. So colleagues first, Riyad, Emma, Niloy.
First of all, thank you so much, both Carolina and Fadia, for your lovely support for our work, for affirming it. You've put a lot of, sowed a lot of seeds of thinking. I don't think I can respond really adequately at this point, but your points about critical agency, the question of power chronography, particularly the notion of power differentials, as well as the rhythmic notions underlying the calibration and recalibration of our faculty lives are well taken, and something we'll definitely consider as we work on future papers. But I really appreciated how you helped add nuance and affirmed as well as complicated what we've described. And I wish we had reviewers like you reading our work, to be honest, because sometimes people don't get it. So really appreciate that. I just wanted to say that. And I wanted to just open it up for Q&A for other colleagues, as well as not just to us, but also to the wonderful comments that Carolina as well as Fadia shared.
Yes, please, in the audience, if there is no, maybe I can just comment and share. One of the things that really struck me from the presentation, colleagues, that you all mentioned, is that the discussion about the agency, right? I feel pretty much like I'm a person that doesn't have control anymore from the time. And thinking of the context of South Africa, and I would love to other colleagues from South Africa to come in here and say, how is the situation for you? One of the facts that I see that has changed for what my other colleagues working here for a long time comment is the massification effect. So the amount of faculty that are available in the university, particularly teaching at the postgraduate level, and the amount of time and how that really challenge. And I raise this point particularly because this country has an agenda that is very powerful and no one here could avoid, that is the decolonization of the curriculum. And for people like me that was educated in a particular academia, that not necessarily making visible the predominance of different type of scholarship distributed across the world, there is a time needed to unlearn and relearn. And time become a critical component of how you negotiate that space, because at the end, there is an intention, a discussion that you cannot avoid. And the time start a constraint because there are, as you described, other type of goals and productivity measures and the managerial components also enter into play. So I wanted to highlight that as something that I have been reflecting. What are the self-censor mechanisms that one may apply? And when you are seeing the relevance of challenge what you know and how you relate in the academia, when the agenda of decolonization is there, and you really understand the importance of embracing it, and then these other material conditions. I would love to hear what your thoughts on that topic. And please, for my colleagues in the room, also raise your questions on the chat.
So I'm sure Carolina as well as Fadia can respond, but just a quick response is one of the things with a lot of policy discourses or decisions that are made often assume we all have equal temporal resources available to us, right? So what you're sharing to me is, and this is where Fadia's work talking about calibrating and recalibrating, is on the one hand, you want to calibrate the so-called question of access, so by massification of higher education. Well, that's a particular logic. Then there's the logic of decolonization. And actually, we're working on papers right now looking at decolonizing curriculum and time, because that's another area that has not been theorized enough. That which time are we talking about and whose time are we working with when we're talking about decolonizing curriculum or pedagogy? So it has its own logics too. So this notion of calibrating, recalibrating that Fadia shared, I think very much applies. But also then we have what Carolina was talking about in terms of our temporal logics coming from our own lives, right? So you're seeing a mixture of embellishment of what we would call a Shomoyscape, again, whereby there's collective notions of temporality at play in terms of policy levels, the politics or movements around decolonizing in South Africa, particularly around curriculum and pedagogy, but also one's personal time. And you know, Roxana, you also came from somewhere else, so you bring a different time map to those colleagues who basically were raised and grew up in South Africa. So there's all these other things. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Riyad. Anything other? I am seeing another question in the on the chat, but if Fadia, Carolina, or Emma or Nilol would like to comment.
Yeah, I can quickly say something about, well, the notion of calibration and recalibration for me is to be considered together with the potential for rhythm, not just to be a signifier of a flow or a disruption of a flow, which is the beginning, the diagnostic of what goes on in social and institutional and political and cultural life, but is also a tool for reorganization, for what I call rhythmic alliances, counter-hegemonic processes and forces that come together. And that applies together with the notion of a recognition of the need to recalibrate based on a certain set of values that your paper in this case reveals to be on the opposite spectrum of what, you know, the global north used to be. But again, as I said in my conclusion, that the point about convergence of some of these issues as prompted by the coronavirus has revealed the need to revisit certain underlying values or exposed the toxicity of managerial productivity, audit, accountability that is rife in the academia of the global north. And so for me, the point I want to make is that recalibration, rhythmic alliances, but also rhythmic refusals are political tools, are not simply ways to describe, you know, in an ethnographic or anthropological way, the reality on the ground is in two phases. Is the recognition of there are different rhythms, different alignments, and what do we do with that? For instance, in your case, there are non-negotiable forces, but there are other negotiable forces, I think, and those are the ones where a rhythmic understanding of pedagogic appropriation and dwelling and enjoyment can come in and bring in the notion of critical agency that Carolina was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadia. I don't know if Carolina, Emma, or Nilol would like to comment. Carolina, I'm seeing your mic is open.
Yeah, no, I don't want to waste. I mean, I don't want to use all the time. But I can see very interesting questions in the chat about, for example, how timescapes between the North and South can be negotiated. This kind of research, I think, could be very, very interesting. So, I mean, I don't think there is a lot of time to take and to talk about, to extend my comments. And I think it would be great if we could try to address these interesting questions in the chat.
Would you like to start addressing that question in particular?
Well, I think that this is more than a South and North issue, because I don't know whether it was clear, but I wanted to share with you that Chile, which is in the global South, is very colonized by narratives in the North. So this idea of neoliberal university and the pressures upon academics and the ways in which they have to use their time in order to produce more is very present in some universities, especially research-oriented universities in Chile. So I think that there are different narratives colonizing the global South, the East. Sometimes, for example, if I think about intercultural universities, indigenous universities, and the way they organize their curriculum, for example, in trying to promote non-Western knowledges and decolonizing the contents, the curriculum contents and pedagogies, for example, I'm sure there is a different notion of time and the way in which we think about ancestral knowledges or practices and values, for example. However, I must say that most of the universities in Latin America are looking at this model of university, these narratives about productivity, international rankings, and these kind of narratives are colonizing our academia, and academics are under a lot of pressure in order to respond to that. And that is the official pressure. But of course, there are other narratives taking place at different layers and at different times. So it would be very interesting to study this clash, especially, for example, if you have international students going to the North and the way they adapt and exercise their agency in the North, and how they, when they come back, they bring these frameworks and these time frames from the North, and they negotiate in the South. That would be very interesting.
I am seeing very specific questions on the chat concerning Shomoyscape. Riyadh, Emma is asking, Shomoyscape could extend to consider how time life is affected by supranational events, activities, tasks. Is commenting on some resonance with Central Asia too. And then is providing any some consideration. Would you like to respond to that comment?
Yeah, I think the question of supranational is always going to be the case wherever we're talking about clock time. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have an international organization like what we think in higher education, transnational actors. Time itself, modern clock time, is a transnational actor in many people's lives all over the world. The notion of time zone that many of we are operating with is not a construction by the world. It's been constructed by particular actors in the world. And it only came because of the movement of labor as well as transportation of goods, right? That's why we have time zones today. And they only came after the 1880s. So really, we need to change the notion of actor and look at time, and whose time is used is a form of transnational process, I would argue. Now, the question about how individuals conceptualize their time, in other words, the academic who talked about professional aspect, but which was relayed to us as political. Again, this is just a qualitative research interpretation. It's one thing to talk about participants making meaning. It's another thing of us researchers, of course, imposing. But then the question is, that also assumes that there is one objective truth out there, and that as researchers, as we impose particular frameworks, we're distorting it. I think we come from the more of a cultural studies background where meaning is not fixed and it's always recontextualized. And that's the point of theories, is to help to recontextualize that a participant who's doing a time map may not be aware, or could be aware of, but may not be articulating. So it raises a lot of epistemological questions. So I don't want to get too much into it, but I hear you in terms of this notion of, because there is no innocent narratives either of a participant sharing something too, right? It's also context-based. And then I just wanted to quickly answer this question about where individual consciousness influence him or her sense of dealing through local version of time conceptualization, which we call Shomai. I think this is very important, that many of our participants, and this is something I hope we can replicate the study in other parts of the world, is that many of our participants, or I would say, have lived in the global north and then came to the global south, right? Or there are many who are aspiring to go to the global north. And one of the key examples of this is that when we started to talk to, one of the questions we asked our participant is, describe your life from the time you wake up to time you go to sleep. And they talked about what they do. And that's our way of understanding how they allocated their time in an average day. And one of the fascinating accounts that emerged is we noticed that those who had dinner earlier, like around 5 or 6, we found out that they actually lived in the global north, somewhere in the west, because dinner time in Bangladesh is often after 8 or 9 p.m. That's just an example whereby someone who lives somewhere, or having a pet, for instance, was another example. Many of our didn't talk about moving, walking a dog, for instance. But that was another example of someone who lived in the West, who adopted a pet culture, brought it there, and now lives that kind of temporal rhythm according to a pet, which is not something you normally see. So I'm using that as examples whereby, yes, to some extent, global North experiences shape the way they even thought of time. Like I appreciate Fadia's notion of the notion of temporal inefficiency comes from a particular understanding of a time map, right? So I think that also adds to the frustration that Fadia was talking about earlier. So I think that is a big part, but also lifestyle, the temporal rhythms that one had somewhere else and they bring it, is a very interesting topic of academic mobility that I don't think we've even touched the surface on. So that's there.
Thank you, Riyad. I'm seeing, Fadia, you opened your mic. Would you like to?
Well, yeah, I mean, just very quickly, but I'm fascinated by this element of let's call it the structure of feeling, because you see, if we go back to the literature, and you've written about it, the shame and the sense of guilt in the neoliberal academia that is tied with notions of productivity. So when I was reading your paper, it struck me that there is a difference between those who were socialized in academia in the global north, who came back and started by saying, there I had control over everything and I could do whatever I wanted, which to me was a strange signifier, because if you asked people in the north, they would probably tell you, global north, that we can't do what we want. And the years opens another can of worms in terms of autonomy and critical agency and so on. But what he was referring to is we don't have that structural precarity. So here I give up to begin with the notion that I will do something efficient with my time. But I was wondering, Bangladeshi faculty who haven't been exposed to the Western gaze of productivity, what was their effective response to these major structural forces? And here we go back to me mentioning frustration, as in, well, if I was stuck in traffic for 8 hours, I would feel completely anxious and nervous about having wasted an entire day. Whereas there is a seamless and almost natural way of adapting to that circumstance and making the most of it in whichever way is possible. Same goes with role of family and tradition, which incidentally we have seen here only with a global pandemic. People have felt that they didn't need to justify their need to tend to their loved ones, to stop working because they needed to care for an ill parent or relative, whereas there is, again, something that is non-negotiable, that the fact that I need to have breakfast and dinner with my father-in-law and the rest will be accommodated. So I was wondering if that was a strong difference in the account of your respondents, if there was a distinction between those who came with those ideas of efficiency, and efficiency in brackets, because I'm not subscribing to this notion of efficiency, by the way, and the ones who had not been exposed to Western or colonized by that kind of Western sense of best use of time, productive use of time.
Yeah, I'm going to allow Nilay or Emma to respond, but just quickly to point 2 points that I forgot to mention, but in response to Fadia. One is we need to move away from this notion that global north and south are spatial signifiers. That in many of the things we're talking about, Shomoyscapes also applies to people in the global north who are coming from very similar precarious conditions. And here I'm talking about undocumented workers, students, those who are already feeling refugee dispossession, right? So that's number one. Number two is that no matter who you are, you're already implicated in modern clock time in Bangladesh. It doesn't matter. Particularly when we're talking about faculty who are mostly middle class, that in itself brings a certain kind of timescape in their lives or understanding of time, right? So I don't know if it's there or us or there, like north or south, and I think that's something we didn't really address in the paper, but we need to, is that this is not just a global south or north in terms of spatial signifiers, but just livelihood as being precarity being a norm, right? But I think the point that you're making about those who are socialized in Bangladesh, I'll let Emma and Nilay respond in terms of their thoughts to that.
I'll just quickly add, please correct me if I'm wrong, and if I don't know if I would follow the whole conversation, but about say, I just quickly add two of my thoughts. This is just my personal thought. I don't know what would happen to what other people think. Say about traffic. So Fadia said that if she's stuck in a 8 hours long traffic, she would thought that she just wasted the whole day. This is a very common thing happen to me. Say like I have to go for a field work in southern Bangladesh, so it's almost 11-hour long journey, and it's 11-hour long because of mostly of traffic. And it could be 7 or 8 hours if there was no traffic. But so what do I think about that? Do I think that I just wasted my day? No, rather I am more concerned about reaching the destination. I'm just more concerned about my sleep. I have to get a sleep. Not about, I don't think that not like what should I produce today or something. I just think, say, when I'm coming back to Dhaka, I'm just thinking about, I was stuck in a traffic and it was almost 16 hours. It was 16 hours long, a 16-hour long journey because of traffic. And I thought that when do I meet my family? When do I meet my family? Yes, it's temporal. I mean, both the notion of productivity and my notion of getting the destination, both are temporal, but the perspectives are kind of different. And another thing is the COVID. Fadia, you probably say that COVID dissolved the north-south temporal boundary and it disrupted these kind of things. Yeah, I think so. But this is just my personal opinion. I don't know what happens, what other people think. It could be a possibility that the global north thinks about they're losing the autonomy of time during the COVID. But in Bangladesh, I think what people around me are more concerned about their access to mobility. They when will they go to work? I mean, they have to feed their family. So when will they go to work, or when will they? And if say the lockdown starts, and if they not all of the people abided by the lockdown, they had to move. They had to move because they had to feed their family, and especially the working class. So and when people were moving, when people were going outside, police or the law enforcement agencies arrested them. So they are more concerned about their access to mobility, or how to alternate their routes, or how to navigate the physical roads to reach their destination or go to work, to avoid the law enforcement agencies. I think these are the facts that's more concerning in Bangladesh. Both are temporal in some sense, but just different perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Niloy. Emma, would you like to add?
I think Niloy covered most of it, so I'm mindful of time. So I think what Niloy and Dr. has added are enough.
Thank you. Well, we are exactly arriving to the end of our webinar time. It has been really a a very inspiring conversation. You gave us a lot of food for thought, particularly me. I already wrote a number of questions that I would like to continue exploring. Thank you so much. I want to give huge thanks to my co-inspirators, colleagues that allow us to be here today, Jenny Duprez, Amy Darrett, and Annele Mgadi. Thank you so much for all the support, for being holding all the technological aspect of this webinar. Huge thanks to Fadia, to Riyadh, to Nishar, to Niloy, to Emma, to Carolina, and all of you that took the time to join us in this conversation. Please keep with an eye open for the next events of ACUSAfrica. Here we are, joining conversation with a critical perspective in the higher education. Thank you so much, Andre, for those welcoming words. And until next time, may you all have a good evening, day ahead, or good night for those friends in Bangladesh. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much, Roxana.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.